protecting the farmland. Besides our farm having been protected, the farmland in the first easement program offered by the state of New Hampshire back in 1980, it was started, 1981, the easement were actually sold. We have had great good fortune in protecting some of the land that's been left, including yours most recently here, Doug. And we see that as so important. Our farm certainly couldn't be continuing to operate where we are if not only our farm hadn't been protected, but also so many of the other farmlands in town which we continue to grow crops on. And I think that's another important point, that we all work so closely together, the farmers and the farmland owners here in town. We work with Barker Farm and Scammon Farm and Flossie Wiggins land, and it's something that I think we're still a tight community, and we're really happy to see the new farms that have come in and the new owners and new types of farming that are evolving. So, who would like to share something from your own family history, or ask a question of any of the panelists or others in the audience? There's some. Okay.
We have a microphone here, so
we've got a couple over here.
What's first?
Oh, introduce yourself, Betty, right?
Okay.
I'm
Betty Backer, formerly Betty Backer, and grew up on a farm which is down at the end of Winnicott Road. The farm hasn't been in the Backer family that many years. It was about the middle 1800 that one of the Backer men married a Clark woman whose father owned the farm. When he died, the father, all of a sudden it became a Backer farm, but that's the way it was back then, and women didn't own farms very often. It has been a dairy farm, and they also raised peaches, fruit. I remember when you were talking about the fruit trees, one of my great uncles telling me that if they didn't pick the peaches in time, they came off the tree and rolled into the river. So they had to be sure and get the peaches off, right time. It was probably 1900. In the early it was in the mid-1850s that this marriage took place and the farm became a Backer place. About the time I was in high school, we raised potatoes, and I can remember Saturday morning, the big thrill was going off in the dump truck with my father, or uncle, and the loads of potatoes in the back, which we took into Portsmouth or Manchester and sometimes Concord, and getting off the farm when you were in high school and going to stores where they had boys. I mean, it was a big thrill. But growing up on the farm was good. When my oldest son, about, 30 years ago, 1980, okay, bought the farm from my dad, and he raised vegetables and fruit and continued to do that until early this spring. He sold the farm to a couple from Washington, D.C. And the farm is organic, which was a pretty long, hard process to have happen. The new couple have talked about wanting to farm. I don't think know too much about it, but they know they don't, and so they're asking questions, and I think probably they'll do a really good job. And we just have to watch out for things like this. But it was a great place to grow up.
Thank you. And over here, Nate.
My name is Betty Crapo, and for about 8 or 9 years, my students and I interviewed people in Stratham, a project that was a collaboration with the Occupational Therapy Department at the University of New Hampshire, where I taught, and the Stratham Historical Society. I won't tell you how we got connected. It's a great story, but it's not about farming. And Stella Scammon urged me to look through the interviews and share some of the interviews with people who are no longer here. So the first person we interviewed was Bob Berry, and as many of you probably know, he was a great storyteller and a great person to initiate the project. I guess people said, well, if Bob can do it, we can too. I guess people were afraid to talk to us, at least at first. He moved to Stratham when he was a child from Greenland or Portsmouth, and he said he always worked. He always worked, and his dad felt that if the kids were working, they wouldn't get into any trouble. And he weeded corn silage at 5 cents a row, and the rows were 900 feet long. He said that mud season had real meaning, that you couldn't get to Portsmouth in the spring because it was too muddy by Stratham Hill Park. And I was surprised by this. I grew up in Philadelphia, so you know, I'm a real foreigner. He said that Route 33 wasn't paved until 1929, so which is not that long ago, really. He had a general farm until 1960 where he sold strawberries, asparagus, potatoes, squash, and he had a small dairy herd. He sold that, or he went out of business and began building houses because there was really no money in farming anymore. And there was a new regulation requiring refrigeration of milk, and he didn't have enough cows to afford to support the refrigeration, and he didn't have enough space to expand the farm. But he did tell us about dealing with milk inspectors, and this is what he said. I had one who was fussy about screens, and you could almost guess when he was coming. So you'd poke a hole in a screen, and he'd forget about everything else. He'd give you the devil for the hole, and when he left, you would fix it, and when he came back a week later, the screen was fixed, so he didn't care about anything else. In 1954, he bought a hot water boiler for the milk house. And he said, so I rigged it so that we could take a shower in the barn. That's how we bathed for probably 6 years. We also interviewed Jim Scammon, who wasn't a farmer when he was an adult, but as a child he worked on farms. He also spoke a lot about hard work and poverty. They both spoke a great deal about how poor they were as children. He helped his father, he said he helped his father milk cows when he was 5 or 6 years old. This was when they were living in Greenland and before they moved to Stratham. And in Stratham he worked at dairy and chicken farms and helped hay in the summer. And he said, we were brought up to work and it didn't bother me at all. He worked on a chicken farm that had 30 to 40,000 chickens, which is, pretty amazing, and carried 100-pound bags of chicken feed and cracked corn to the 3 levels of the barn. And he was 13 when he was doing this. He picked eggs twice a day, cleaned out the coops. He worked 6.5 days a week before and after school, but he took Sunday afternoon off to play baseball. He worked during the war because the farmers needed help, and he said, of course, the farmer couldn't get any help, that's why he hired a kid like me. We interviewed Margaret Pearson Tate, who was born in 1907, and her dad had a farm on College Road that had a large greenhouse, about 75 to 100 acres of land. It was a market farm, and they kept cows for their own use. It seemed to me from the interviews that they were more prosperous. I don't think they were wealthy by any stretch of the imagination, but I really felt from the interviews with Jim and Bob that they were really very poor. We also interviewed John Hutton, who was considerably younger than the other folks. And at the time that we interviewed him, he was sharing his driveway with the golf course. They were constructing the golf course. And so that was a very unpleasant time in his life. And he subsequently moved to Lee. But when he was talking about that move, he said, about that place in Lee, we're going over there because it's kind of nice, but I've always had in the back of my mind, even if I move over there, that I'd still be a person from away. Isn't that weird? It's only 3 or 4 towns over, still in the same state, and it feels like a foreign country to me. I would be from away, and I'm very hesitant to give that up. And I think that, the stories that have been told tonight really give you a sense of why somebody would feel that way about leaving Stratham and the close relationships and the relationships to the land. So.
Thank you, Margaret. We do have some farmers from Lee here tonight, too. So, Lucy.
I need to do a visual, so. John Hutton is my baby brother. And he was very distraught by the golf course. But this display about Roby Jewell's farm and the Millbrook farm that he sold to my dad and my Uncle Fred in 1948, where I grew up, that is now totally gone. It's the Golf Club of New England. The golf course is there. The only thing left that was there when I was growing up is there's a big horse chestnut tree out by the entrance. And that used to be right in front of our front porch, and that's the only thing left. But it was a great place to grow up. But Roby Jewell had this wonderful, this barn, but then he built a whole L that came toward the road, and it had garages in it, but it also had an indoor auction arena where he did the auctions that Dougie was talking about. And Doug's a lot older than me. But I was too little to go to the auction, but I remember all the cars that parked on our lawn and on the road between our house and the house that my brother, where we lived after we sold the farm to the Sandersons, and I remember how exciting it was when they did the auctions. Roby Jewell was my grandfather's best friend, and my grandfather was from Hampstead, and that's how we ended up here in the first place. But this is our farm way before we owned it, and it's neat to see all the horses, and I know my brother would get a real kick out of it because he has a lot of draft horses. The other thing I wanted to tell you was this picture is a house and farm. There's a picture of the barns too that Otis Burley French built, and it's over on Willowbrook. And Otis Burley French is my husband's great-grandfather, and I believe that when Doug's grandfather got off the train and walked up the road, he bought this farm from the great-grandmother, who was a widow at the time. Her husband died in like 1918, and I think the Scammons came in the early 20s.
About 1920.
Yeah, okay, so they bought it from Mary, who was a widow. So, you see, we're all connected. It's really weird. I just want to tell you one story that I remember growing up on the farm. In the dairy barn, which was this one here, there were the stand where the cows ran all the way down on one side and then halfway down on the other. And there was a door where the animals went out after they'd been milked. And in the last stanchion, it wasn't a stanchion, it was a stall, and that's where the bull was. My uncle and my dad always had a bull, much to the chagrin of all the children. And he was securely hitched. He had a big ring in his nose, and he was securely hitched, but we were absolutely terrified. And if you walked in front of the stanchion of cows, there was a narrow pathway, maybe this wide, and then windows. And we would flatten ourselves, literally, against the wall. Of course, this bull would have to go through, metal stanchions and everything to get near us, and he probably wasn't even in the least bit interested, but I can still remember flattening myself against the outside wall to get to the stairs to the haymow where the kittens were, which is what we were interested in. And I clearly remember when Hurricane Carol came, it was probably 1955, whatever. In the summer, they always took the windows out in the barn. We didn't do the screen thing, I guess. And my parents took us with them to the barn because they didn't want to leave us in the house in case a tree fell on it, trying to put the windows back in because all the rain was coming in on the animals. And the other memory I have is as I was growing up older, I used to work summers picking strawberries at Wigan Farm for 10 cents a box. And I could make $40 in a week, and I thought I was rich.
Thank you, Lucy. It's just the milk rooms that have to be screened, Lucy, so it's okay if the screens weren't on the cow barn windows. Flossie, wait.
I have to follow Lucy. I lost what I was going to say. Jeez. I'll go back, way back to, my grandfather. I live on Squamsky Road. My grandfather bought the house I live in 1926. And he always said to me, and I didn't realize what he was talking about, we were the third owners since it was a land grant. Well, when I went through the deeds, it was owned by the Wiggins until 1896, I think. And it left the hands and went into it went into Benjamin Whitcomb's hands. And then it went out of his hands to a Merrill, and he bought it back by a quitclaim deed or something. Evidently, the Merrill didn't have the money to pay for it or something, but he took it back. And then Jim Cyphers bought it, and his wife was born in my house, and she married a Gray in Newfields, and Betty Gray went to school with me. And I married a Wigan, so it's gone full scale back to Wigan again. And I can remember coming in from Greenland, we had Harold Piper's farm. A lot of people remember that here in Stratham. And when Lucy said she picked strawberries for 10 cents a box, I used to ride horseback up to True Roby's house. True Roby's sister was Roby Jewel's mother's. True Roby's was Roby Jewel's mother. That's how he got the name Roby. His name is really Henry Roby Jewel, and he didn't like Henry, so he took the Roby. And his, my father-in-law, Elmer, and Roby were first cousins. And Uncle True, as we called him, had market gardens there, and he used to take stuff, and also the cabins where the stone places, he had cabins. And I used to ride horseback up there and pick strawberries for 5 cents a box. And then you came down the road, and then Ernest Wigan had the farm with the, right across from Stratham Hill Park with all the cows there. And that's Peter Wigan's grandfather. Right, Pete? And then you came a little further, and was Elmer Wiggin, your friendly eggman. Wiggins Egg Service started there, and it's still going today. It's down on Squamsky Road now. And then you at the top of